This video is brought to you by Babbel, the #1 language learning app in the world with more than 10 million subscribers worldwide. The world's getting smaller and smaller, and your list of reasons to learn a language is getting bigger and bigger. So whether your language needs are tied to international travel, professional necessities, or just personal curiosity, there is no better option than Babbel. Now, you might have already had a crack at this with some free basic apps from the App Store, but Babbel goes way beyond the basics with 14 languages and proven learning techniques. So why is Babbel better? Well, with Babbel, you can count on people who have actual experience teaching the language rather than just relying on machine learning like other apps. It's also totally ad-free, which means there are no distractions. It'll also focus on language for real life, teaching you about situations you'll actually encounter, less biblioteca and more vino, if you know what I mean. And with Babbel, it's really easy to just jump in and practice whenever you've got a down moment. And, those short moments of practice, they really do add up overall. So what are you waiting for? Get on with it. Start learning a new language today with Babbel, and for a limited time, you can get up to 65% off the cost of a subscription. There is a link below, and let's get into it. There's a scene in the movie Jurassic World in which we discover that Vincent D'Onofrio's villainous character has designs on getting his hands on some raptors so that the fearsome creatures can be used as weapons in warfare. It sounds like an utterly preposterous idea in real life, because why would you unleash a ravenous killing machine over which you have very little control on the world when it could just as easily kill your own forces? But as silly as it might sound, it's not without historical precedent. Mankind has long thought of ways to turn animals into weapons of war, sometimes with much better results than others. In the video today, 10 examples. Number 10. Bat bombs. No review of animals used as weapons of war would be complete without including the tale of the Pennsylvania dentist who came up with a scheme to burn down Japan with the help of many, many bats. It was in 1941 when a man named Lytle Adams proposed a plan to the US government. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he believed that the United States could counterattack by strapping small incendiary devices to bats, which would then be released over Japanese cities to make their way into attics and under the eaves of buildings where they could be detonated later on. The plan was to release a massive bat population, and then, if they were all detonated simultaneously, you would have literally thousands of fires breaking out on a massive area. On paper, it sounds like absolute chaos. In 1941, this would be an entirely new level of fear and terror for any population that suffered such an attack. Just imagine your entire city bursting into flames all at the same time for no discernible reason. As insane as it sounds, Adams was friends with the president's wife, so he was able to get his idea in front of the National Research Defense Committee. By 1943, Project X-Ray was underway, the code name for turning bats into tiny bombs. The army captured thousands of bats with the use of nets, and the program featured setback after setback. Transporting the bats proved to be problematic. Also, releasing them in mid-air was an issue as well. At one point, an entire airplane hangar and a general's car were lit on fire when things didn't go as planned. $2 million later, the entire scheme was cancelled. Number 9. Anti-tank dogs. Of all the animals in the world that assisted humans in a military or police fashion, none are likely more prominent than dogs. Horses have a long history as transportation for soldiers and police, but dogs have been trained to be partners. They are adept at search and rescue, they can track, and they can even attack. So it seems natural that we've had a bit of a colourful history in terms of how the military has tried to use them. Dogs in military service are used for tracking enemies, or even things like sniffing out landmines, and of course they can run faster than a human, which makes them ideal for hunting down enemies and subduing them. The Soviets, in the Second World War, tried to take things to a whole new level with anti-tank dogs. Soviet forces began training dogs to handle tanks as early as the 1930s. The idea was that a dog would be strapped with explosives and trained to crawl under an enemy tank. Each dog was outfitted with 12 kilograms of TNT, about 26 pounds. The training of the dogs was as brutal as you could imagine it would have to be. Dogs were starved, and then meat was hidden under practice tanks to encourage them to run underneath. They were exposed to the sounds of artillery fire so that they wouldn't be distracted or scared away by the noises of war. The strategy was not without its problems. Soviet tanks and German tanks didn't use the same kind of fuel, so on the battlefield the dogs didn't know where to go because German tanks didn't smell right. Also, the German soldiers were actually firing at the dogs, so none of them made it to their targets. After some tweaks, the dogs proved successful in some instances, including a battle in July of 1942 in which a battalion of these anti-tank dogs took out dozens of tanks. Other battles were similarly successful, and by 1943 the Soviet army was able to deploy actual anti-tank weapons, saving the lives of many future dogs dogs who were no longer needed as living explosives after destroying over 300 enemy tanks. Number 8. War elephants. Roman soldiers were using cavalry charges as early as sometime around 380 AD. Horses have long been a part of war, but the idea of using a larger, more fearsome animal has always been an attractive and mysterious one. That's probably why the idea of a war elephant is so interesting even to this day, when we have machines of war that can do so much more. Believe it or not, war elephants were a real thing, and still are a real thing today. The most famous use of war elephants dates back to Hannibal and his journey across the Alps with a team of war elephants to strike at Rome itself. Hannibal lay siege to the countryside for 15 years after that, even though he wasn't actually able to secure a victory over Rome. But he surely surprised a lot of people when he appeared over the Alps with some elephants in tow, which, well, no one expected to see. Throughout India in the 4th century and beyond, war elephants were bedecked with armor and weaponry to destroy enemy infantry forces. Steel bulls were chained to elephant trunks, and the animals were trained how to spin them to crush enemies. Some even had large crossbows mounted on their backs that a soldier could fire. Fast forward to modern times, and you can actually find elephants in present-day Myanmar working with soldiers on the front lines. The Kachin Independence Army are a group of rebel forces who make use of war elephants in their guerrilla tactics. In 2012, it was believed that they had 4 dozen of these war elephants. They exist in the deep jungle where motorized vehicles can't reach. Most of them are used as pack animals, but others could be considered combat elephants. They try to keep them out of any direct confrontation, mostly using them as psychological weapons, because the sound of an elephant trumpeting in the woods before you're attacked by soldiers with guns is something that will rattle just about anybody. The elephants themselves don't see a lot of actual fighting, because although they could theoretically withstand some degree of assault, once gunpowder became a reality and cannonballs were being used on the battlefield, elephants simply became large targets rather than weapons. Number 7. War dolphins. Even if you don't know a lot about dolphins, you probably know that they're exceptionally intelligent and extremely playful. It's that first part that is actually being used against them by some military forces who see it as an opportunity to make combat dolphins. Back in 2016, the Russian government made public that they were actually in the market for 5 combat dolphins that they could buy. The requirements were that the dolphins be physically unblemished and have perfect teeth. The country had been using dolphins for various military purposes since the Cold War. Back then, they were used to detect submarines and flag mines. Russia is not the only country that has sought to use dolphins in wartime. America also was making dolphin soldiers as far back as 1960. The Navy Marine Mammal Training Program has 85 dolphins in San Diego, California. You'll be happy to know that the US military doesn't train dolphins to ever get in harm's way. They find underwater mines, including ones that are buried on the ocean floor, and they can also discover an enemy presence in the water and alert military forces that an attack is imminent. Both of these are strictly location only and don't involve direct contact, so that the dolphins will be unharmed. Number 6. Bees. Most people are reasonably afraid of bees because if you make one angry, they can sting you, and that is painful. This aversion to bees is by no means a modern thing. Throughout history, people have been cautious to avoid stinging insects. That's why, after catapults were invented, someone got the bright idea to launch beehives into enemy camps as a form of warfare. Beehives were catapulted from ships onto the decks of other ships and over walls into cities. Apparently, in the 14th century, there was a windmill-like Gatling gun device that had hives on the arms that would be shot towards the enemy, thoroughly bathing the area in very angry bees. Number 5. Rats. In the movie Wanted, there is an agent of the Guild of Assassins who uses rats as weapons. They're strapped with explosives so they can infiltrate a building and blow up a target. As fanciful as that sounds, it's not entirely far-fetched in terms of real-world uses of rats with explosive results. It turns out that back in the day, British secret agents, think the real-life counterparts to James Bond, were actually outfitted with exploding rats. There was one incident when a special operations executive had the guys in the lab create 100 exploding rats for him by stuffing the bodies of the little creatures with explosives. Obviously, they were dead at the time, and they were skinned, filled with plastic explosives, and then sewn up again. The plan for the exploding rats was to place them near coal boilers. When they were discovered, a natural reaction of whoever was feeding the boiler would be to just shovel the corpse of the rat in with the coal and get rid of it. And since it was full of explosives, the boiler would then blow up and take out a sizable chunk of whatever building they were in. Weirdly enough, the exploding rats never got deployed in the field because they were intercepted by German forces. Once the Germans realized that the Brits were importing explosive rats, German forces were sent out into the field to track down as many rats as they could and eliminate them before they could blow up. The fact was there were no additional exploding rats, so while the explosives didn't get to do their intended job, at least they ended up wasting the enemy's time. In fact, the SOE concluded that the effect of the Germans discovering the rats and hunting for additional ones in the field was actually a more effective result than had the rats done their intended purpose. Number 4. Scorpions. Anyone who lives in a desert climate near scorpions knows just how much much of a nuisance those little arachnids can be. Most scorpion stings are painful and can cause issues with irregular breathing and heartbeats, but more serious side effects are rare. That doesn't mean they're unheard of. It's entirely possible that a scorpion could sting and kill you, especially if you have an anaphylactic reaction. In the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus was attempting to lay siege to Mesopotamia. When he reached the city of Hatra, the emperor and his forces tried to get over the wall of the stronghold, only to be met with earthenware pots hurled at them like bombs from the other side. The pots had been loaded with scorpions, which were extremely prevalent in the area and a well-known problem for locals. Roman soldiers were showered with scorpions, the pots breaking up on their bodies and covering them with the angry bugs. This method of defense continued for 20 days until the Roman emperor finally gave up and retreated. Number 3. Rhinos. One of the most famous scenes in the movie Black Panther involves a charge of war rhinos. You can imagine, even without the assistance of some Hollywood special effects, how formidable an armored rhinoceros would look coming at you on the field of battle. Unlike the well-documented war elephants, the idea of a real-life war rhino is harder to pin down. First and foremost, the problematic fact is that rhinos are extremely aggressive and resistant to being trained. Elephants can be domesticated to a degree, but the same cannot be said for a rhino. At least not in the way that anyone has experienced and kept a record of. There are, however, scattered reports throughout history of the existence of war rhinos. The problem is that they are not reliable enough that you could claim with any degree of certainty that this was really a thing that happened. There are pieces of artwork from the 1500s to the 1600s that show rhinos in armor, but they may simply be fanciful drawings rather than any kind of realistic interpretation of the creature. Elsewhere, you can find unsubstantiated reports that the Ahom people may have used rhinos as animals of war, but there is little evidence to back it up. So, is it possible that the world at one point had war rhinos? Well, yes, but we can't definitively say one way or the other. Number 2. War pigs. Not just a Black Sabbath song, war pigs were actual weapons of war. Pigs are known to be very intelligent animals and also highly aggressive. If you've ever had to deal with wild hogs, you know how territorial they can be, as well as how dangerous. Believe it or not, war pigs were actually used to counter war elephants. Pliny the Elder, famous Roman author and philosopher, was one of the first to recognize that elephants were oddly afraid of the squeal of pigs. Pigs have been used successfully to disrupt charges of war elephants, but at the siege of Megara in the year 266, things escalated to a whole new level. The Megarians were under siege by Antigonus II Gonatas, who came to the city with a contingent of war elephants. Megara responded by unleashing war pigs and also coating them in oil before setting them ablaze. Burning pigs rushed the line of war elephants, creating chaos. The elephant handlers were unable to control the large beasts, and the animals turned, crushing their own lines. At the end of the day, the war pig was more than capable of destroying an advancing war elephant force. Number 1. Flaming monkeys. If there are two words that you can combine to instill more fear in a person than flaming and monkeys, you should copyright it immediately. The very idea of a flaming monkey coming at you on the field of battle is disturbing on a number of levels. Still, try to imagine this strategy, which was apparently employed by the Chinese Imperial Army during the Song Dynasty sometime in the 12th century. Word is that during a battle with the rebels of Yangzhou province, the army resorted to lighting monkeys on fire and then loosing them in the rebel camp, where they ran amok, lighting things on fire until presumably they collapsed. So not only did the soldiers have the disorienting experience of dealing with flaming combatants, they also probably had to deal with the panic shrieks of flaming monkeys as well. It's about as horrifying a fighting tactic as you can possibly imagine. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.